The plains woke slowly, yawning beneath the stretch of morning light. Dew clung to the low grasses like 1,000 tiny mirrors, each reflecting a sky that seemed to open wider than a heart could hold. The wind whispered through sagebrush, soft as a lullaby, carrying the faint scent of earth and smoke from distant chimneys. On the horizon, the sun pressed against the edges of the world, spilling gold over the undulating hills and casting shadows that trembled like old memories. He walked alone, boots stirring dust, eyes tracing the horizon as though it held some secret only he could read. His name mattered little here. The land itself seemed to know him, remembered the shape of his hands, the rhythm of his steps, the quiet weight he carried. Each morning he followed this same path, passing the fence posts he had hammered into the soil decades ago, listening to the creak of wood and the sigh of the wind as if they spoke in the language of old souls. The rancher's land was vast, stretching in waves of amber and green, dotted with wildflowers that bent under the tender pressure of sunlight. Yet it had begun to feel emptier than he wished to admit. The barns held echoes of laughter that no longer existed. The corral's wooden rails remembered the hoofbeats of horses long gone, and the cabins waited patiently for voices that had moved on. Solitude had been his companion, a steady friend in its own quiet way. But lately it had become too loud, its presence pressing against the walls of his heart. From this distance, he had seen them first, an Apache family, moving carefully across a neighboring plain, their small figures bending and swaying with the land's rise and fall. There was dignity in their gait, a quiet pride that did not ask for attention but demanded it nonetheless. Their lives were a delicate balance, carved from the hard edges of the world, yet they carried it with grace. Something in their quiet strength touched the rancher more than he wished to acknowledge. He paused near the edge of a dry creek bed, brushing a hand along the coarse grass. The memory of his own past pressed against him. Childhood mornings spent chasing light across fields, nights spent listening to the wind weave stories into the darkness, dreams of family and laughter that never fully settled. Life had been generous in some ways, cruel in others. And now, standing on the precipice of a decision he had carried silently for months, he felt the weight of both. The town beyond the hills was waking too. Smoke curled from chimneys like hesitant fingers, and the soft clatter of early work drifted on the breeze. Rumors traveled faster than men on horseback. Talk of settlers moving west, of families trying to survive where the land was thin and the water scarcer. The rancher had heard whispers about the Apache family, their struggles, their resilience, their quiet dignity. Some called it pride, others called it stubbornness. He called it humanity, and he had been watching, observing from a distance, like one studies the movement of clouds, knowing they shift in ways one cannot always predict. That evening, when the sun had dipped low enough to stain the horizon in crimson and violet, he sat on the porch of the main cabin, the boards worn smooth by decades of care. He poured a cup of coffee, its steam curling like smoke from some distant, remembered fire. In the fading light, he traced the fence line with his eyes, imagining hands that would one day care for it as he had. He thought of the Apache family, the quiet way they had carried themselves, and a thought took root, fragile yet insistent. Perhaps the land could belong to them now. It was not a decision made in haste, nor was it born of guilt. It was something older, something that whispered in the marrow of his bones, that life is measured not in possession, but in the care we offer to others, in the legacy we leave behind in the soil, in the hearts of those who follow. He could feel the weight of history pressing down, the generations that had walked these plains, the stories etched into the earth. And he understood, suddenly, that giving this land was not surrender, but a continuation, a way to honor the past while nurturing a future. He rose with the first whisper of dawn, boots crunching along frost-laced grass. The sky was pale blue, and the light of morning shimmered on the edges of distant hills. He packed what he would need, a notebook filled with years of observations, a few tools that had seen more hands than he could count, and a lantern, though its light would not be needed for long. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried, as if the land itself dictated the rhythm. When he reached the edge of the plain, he paused, taking in the full sweep of the horizon. There, in the distance, the family worked together, tending a small plot of land that had stubbornly yielded a modest harvest. He noted the way the young boys' laughter rose like birdsong, the way the mother's hands moved with the practiced elegance of someone intimately familiar with the rhythm of the earth. And for the first time in years, he felt a lightness in his chest, a fluttering of hope that life had more to offer than the solitude he had accepted. The decision crystallized quietly, not with a rush, but with the inevitability of seasons turning. He would offer them the land, not as charity, not as pity, but as a gift of trust, as a bridge across the gulf that history and circumstance had carved. He did not yet know how they would respond, whether they would accept or hesitate, but he understood that the act itself was sacred. To give was to honor, and to honor was to remember that the land was alive, that it carried the footprints of countless souls, and that generosity could ripple outward like the wind across the plains. Night fell slowly, the sky deepening to indigo, sprinkled with distant stars that gleamed like scattered seeds of memory. In the cabin, the rancher lit a lamp and sat at the old wooden table, tracing words across paper with careful, deliberate strokes. He wrote of the land, of its needs and gifts, of the family he had observed and the life he hoped they would carve. The pen moved like a brush across canvas, leaving lines that spoke of hope, of trust, of quiet courage. Outside, the wind carried the soft cries of night creatures, the low murmur of distant water, and the rustle of leaves that seemed to nod in approval. The rancher closed his notebook, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, and allowed himself a small smile. Dawn would come again, and with it, perhaps, a new chapter, one written not only in the soil, but in hearts willing to embrace the unfamiliar with respect and grace. Sleep claimed him at last, deep and untroubled, for he had taken the first step toward a change that would ripple far beyond his understanding. Somewhere, in the quiet distance, the Apache family slept as well, unaware that their lives were about to converge with his in a way both gentle and profound. And in that quiet night, the land itself seemed to breathe, as if holding its own secret, waiting for the sun to rise and witness the unfolding of a story that would be whispered for generations. The horizon promised more than light. It promised connection. The wind, the earth, the faint shimmer of stars all hinted at a day where human hearts could meet, where kindness could plant roots deeper than any fence post or furrowed soil. And when the first rooster crowed, calling the world awake, the rancher would be ready to meet that day with hands open, heart steady, and a quiet courage born of years spent listening to the language of the land. And so it began, the soft unfolding of a tale that would carry whispers of trust, the weight of history, and the promise of dawn. Dawn arrived slowly, washing the plains in soft apricot and rose. Mist clung to the hollows like a whispered secret, and the horizon seemed to stretch farther than it had the day before. The rancher walked toward the Apache family with deliberate steps, boots pressing softly into the damp earth, the air carrying the scent of sage and the faint smoke of last night's fire. He carried no grand proclamations, no flags or banners. He carried only himself, the weight of his decision, and the quiet hope that kindness might speak in its own language. The family noticed him from a distance, a figure moving across the golden plains, steady and deliberate. The father's eyes narrowed slightly, a gesture of caution, while the mother drew their youngest child close, fingers brushing through hair like a gentle promise of protection. The children, curious and unafraid, whispered to each other and darted behind their mother, peeking cautiously at the lone man approaching. When he arrived, he lowered his gaze respectfully, allowing silence to fill the space first, giving them time to measure him, to weigh the intention behind each step. Words were not needed at once. He simply observed, the subtle way the father's hands flexed, the tender curve of the mother's smile as she watched her children, the way the youngest child clutched a small wooden toy with a grip both possessive and proud. These details spoke more clearly than any speech. He knelt and drew a small circle in the dirt with a stick, tracing the boundaries of his land. The gesture was unassuming, almost intimate, and the family leaned forward, curiosity softening their wariness. He traced the contours of the fields, the fences, the creek that curved like a silver ribbon across the property. He did not speak immediately, allowing the rhythm of his hand to translate his intent. This land, this earth, these hours of care and sweat could be theirs. At last he spoke, voice low and steady, blending with the whispering wind, not in grandiose terms, not with ceremony, but as if he were confiding a long-held secret. The land was theirs if they wished it. The words were simple, yet they carried weight, a gravity born of years spent understanding the quiet loyalty of soil, the patience it demanded, and the trust it deserved. The father's eyes widened, the corners of his mouth twitching in a brief, almost imperceptible smile. The mother's hand went to her chest, fingers pressing lightly against the heart that had held so much worry, so many questions about survival and dignity. The children looked from one figure to the other, sensing something larger than themselves, a kindness that could alter the course of days to come. Acceptance did not come with words, but with gestures. The father extended a hand, not in submission, but in mutual acknowledgement. The rancher clasped it firmly, and in that grip, generations of unspoken understanding passed. A child stepped forward, small fingers brushing the rancher's sleeve, curiosity and trust mingling in that fleeting contact. The wind shifted, lifting dust and carrying it across the plains like a soft benediction. From that morning onward, the days took on a new rhythm. They worked together in quiet harmony, repairing fences, tending horses, mending what needed mending. The rancher watched the mother plant seeds, her hands moving with reverence, turning soil as though it were sacred. He watched the children chase a foal across the field, laughter carrying across the valley like wind through chimes. And in these small, shared moments, bonds grew, not rushed, not forced, but steady, like the slow course of a river carving canyons into stone. Evenings were spent around the fire, the orange glow painting faces and shadows alike. Stories were exchanged, not all in words. Some were gestures, glances, the quiet communion of shared labor and shared space. The rancher told tales of the land, of storms that had bent trees, of winters that had whispered secrets in the crackle of frozen streams, of summers where the sky itself seemed to press its warmth into the earth. In return, the family shared their stories, simple yet profound, of survival, of the lessons carried in hands calloused by generations, of hope nurtured against the weight of hardship. The townsfolk, ever curious, began to notice the quiet transformation. Some frowned, suspicious of generosity they could not comprehend. Others whispered admiration, marveling at the courage it took to give freely. An old neighbor, leaning on his cane at the edge of the porch, watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation. He spoke once, voice roughened by years, acknowledging the rare beauty of such an act, that to give something precious without demand was an art few could master. The rancher observed this all with calm patience. He knew the world moved slowly here, like honey dripping from combs, and that judgment often lagged behind understanding. He did not seek approval, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the land, his land, would be loved in ways that mirrored the care he had given it. And he saw, slowly, that the Apache family possessed a tenderness, a respect for the earth, that promised the land would flourish under their stewardship. Occasionally, he would pause, watching the family at work, marveling at the way they carried themselves with dignity despite the scarcity that had marked their past. The mother's hands were steady, her movements deliberate, her eyes soft yet unwavering. The father's quiet strength anchored them, a pillar of resilience that required no grand statements. Even the children, full of wonder and energy, moved with an instinctive grace, as if the land itself had taught them the rhythm of life. It was not a story of sudden friendship, nor of instant trust. There were moments of hesitation, of doubt, of the subtle friction that accompanies any meeting of worlds. But each day, the tension softened, like frost melting in the morning sun. Shared meals, repaired fences, and quiet conversations by the fire wove a tapestry of understanding that needed no thread of urgency. It was patience, and in that patience lay the deepest beauty of all. One afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the fields, the youngest child approached the rancher with a small gift, a bundle of dried flowers, carefully pressed and tied with a strip of cloth. No words were exchanged. The gesture spoke volumes. The rancher accepted them gently, feeling the weight of the gesture not as obligation, but as a bridge, a quiet acknowledgement of connection, of trust earned without demand. As weeks passed, the land itself seemed to respond to this new harmony. The crops grew steadier, the horses moved with renewed vigor, the streams ran clearer, as if the soil had recognized the hands that now nurtured it. The rancher walked the fields at dawn and dusk, eyes tracing the contours of the earth, heart swelling with the quiet joy of knowing he had made a choice that mattered. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do, and because he understood the sacredness of giving. The nights became a canvas for reflection. Sitting on the porch under a sky thick with stars, the rancher watched the family move through their routines, a soft light spilling from cabin windows, children laughing softly in sleep, the mother humming a tune carried from memory, the father tending the animals with steady hands. It was a picture of life's quiet victories, small yet profound, the kind that leave lasting marks not on pages but on hearts. Even in town, where skepticism lingered like smoke, the story of the rancher's gift began to take root. Some mocked, some envied, some quietly admired, but all began to understand that true generosity does not demand applause. And the rancher, standing at the edge of his newly shared land, felt a sense of completeness he had never known, a fulfillment born not of possession, but of trust and connection, of seeing life flourish under hands willing to nurture. One morning, as the wind carried the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain, the rancher noticed a subtle change in the family's rhythm. The father's work had become more confident, the mother's movements more fluid, the children's laughter bolder. And in that quiet observation, he understood something deep and unspoken. Giving had not only altered their lives, it had reshaped his own. His days of solitude had softened, replaced by a tapestry of shared moments, by a bond built not on words but on respect, care, and the delicate beauty of trust extended without expectation. It was in these quiet, unremarkable hours that the rancher began to feel the stirrings of something larger. He sensed that what he had given was more than land. It was a seed of hope, a quiet revolution of hearts. And in the stillness of the plains, as sunlight warmed the earth and wind whispered across the fields, he realized that tomorrow, and the days that would follow, would bring something neither he nor the family could yet imagine. But he was ready to witness it, to meet it with open hands and steady heart. Thus the days unfolded, slow and measured, like a song carried by the wind across the plains. The rancher, once solitary, had become a part of a living tapestry of care and quiet strength. And though the greatest act, the arrival of the tribe, had not yet come, the foundation was laid, firm and tender, ready to bear the weight of the story yet to be written. In the golden glow of late afternoon, as shadows lengthened and the wind carried the scent of distant rain, he paused once more at the edge of the field. The family worked together seamlessly, laughter and labor intertwined, and he smiled softly to himself. The land was no longer merely his. It had become theirs, and in that shared stewardship, he found a peace deeper than he had ever known. And somewhere, beyond the hills and the horizon, dawn was preparing to carry its own surprise. The quiet promise of connection, of community, and of a story that would ripple beyond this place was stirring, ready to arrive like the slow, inevitable sweep of sunlight across the plains. The first blush of dawn broke slowly over the horizon, spilling gold and rose across the plains. Mist clung to the low valleys, curling and twisting like tendrils of whispered secrets. The rancher stepped out onto the soft earth, boots brushing dew-laden grass, and breathed the chill morning air. Somewhere far off, a soft murmur of wind carried a rhythm, almost like the beating of a distant drum, steady and patient. At first, it was only the sense of something moving, small shadows stretching across the horizon, blending with the folds of the land. But as the sun lifted higher, those shadows resolved into shapes, figures moving with quiet purpose, carrying belongings and children, guiding horses with the grace of a people intimately familiar with the pulse of the earth. The rancher's chest tightened, a mix of anticipation and awe, as he realized this was no mere family approaching. They came steadily, hundreds of them, yet their arrival was not a rush but a measured unfolding, like a river slowly revealing its breadth. Women carried bundles, their movements fluid and sure. Men guided horses with practiced hands, their eyes scanning the landscape with quiet vigilance. Children skipped between them, small feet light on the damp earth. Even from a distance, their dignity radiated, a silent affirmation of lives lived with courage and care. The rancher remained still, rooted to the soil he had cared for all his life, watching the procession unfold. The Apache family he had come to know, the father, the mother, the children, stood at the edge of the plains, their expressions a mixture of awe and humility. They did not speak, for no words could capture the gravity of this moment. Instead, they gestured subtly, inviting their kin to cross the threshold of a land that had been offered freely, tenderly, without expectation. As they approached, the plain seemed to shift beneath their passage. The early morning light shimmered across the dewy grasses, glinting off the tips of sage and the flowing mane of horses. The air carried the scent of earth and sun, of sweat and leather, and beneath it all, the quiet hum of anticipation. The rancher's eyes followed each movement, noting the children's wonder, the adults' steady confidence, the unspoken communication between members of the tribe that spoke of lifetimes spent together. When the first of them reached the rancher's land, he stepped forward, hands slightly raised, not in surrender, but in respect. The father of the family he had befriended nodded, a brief smile touching the corners of his mouth, and the tribe responded with a low murmur, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Women laid small offerings of herbs and woven cloth upon the ground, a gesture of gratitude and recognition. Children ran to touch the fence posts, curious and amazed, their laughter ringing out like wind through chimes. The rancher extended a hand once more, this time to the tribe as a whole, not just to the family he had known. The gesture was met with a ripple of nods, a wave of trust passing silently through the ranks. And in that instant, the land seemed to embrace them, as though it had been waiting, holding itself in quiet readiness for this moment of convergence. The mother of the family approached him, eyes glistening with unshed tears. She placed her hand lightly over his, a connection that spoke more eloquently than words could. Around them, the tribe moved with a rhythm that mirrored the land itself, setting up camp with ease and grace, tending to horses and children, arranging their small encampment as if guided by instinct. The rancher watched, a lump in his throat, realizing that he was witnessing not just the transfer of property, but the birth of a living, breathing community. As the sun climbed higher, painting the plains in gold and amber, the tribe's gratitude manifested in small, profound ways. A child brought him a carefully carved wooden figure, placing it in his hands with the reverence of a sacred offering. Women shared bread and herbs, gestures simple yet imbued with meaning. Men offered quiet nods of acknowledgement, their eyes carrying the weight of respect and understanding. Each interaction was a testament to trust earned, not demanded, to generosity received and honored in return. The rancher walked among them, touching a shoulder here, adjusting a saddle there, offering guidance without intrusion. He marveled at the rhythm of their labor, the way they moved as one despite their number, the way the land seemed to respond to their presence, thriving under hands that knew its needs. He felt a surge of quiet pride, not in himself, but in the act of giving, of opening a space for life to flourish. By mid-morning, the encampment was fully established, and the rancher found a quiet spot on a low rise to observe. Children chased each other across the fields, their laughter ringing across the plains like music. Horses grazed peacefully, the soft rustle of hooves on grass blending with the whisper of wind. The adults worked with steady purpose, tending to the land, the animals, and one another, creating a harmony that seemed to extend to the very soil beneath their feet. The rancher felt the magnitude of the moment wash over him. All his years of solitude, all his careful tending of fences and fields had led to this. He had offered what he valued most, not for recognition or reward, but because he understood that generosity has a language all its own, a dialect spoken in deeds, in trust, in quiet, sustained care. And now, he was witnessing the eloquence of that language unfold before his eyes. As the sun rose to its zenith, the tribe gathered near the old oak at the center of the land. It had been the rancher's favorite tree, its branches sturdy and welcoming, a silent witness to years of sunrises and storms. Here, the tribe paused, forming a loose circle, heads bowed slightly in respect. The father stepped forward, voice low and resonant, offering thanks in the cadence of his people's tongue. The words were not meant for him alone, but for the land itself, for the spirit of generosity that had brought them here, for the trust that had been extended without hesitation. The rancher responded with a simple nod, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. He could not speak in their language, could not echo the poetry of their words, but he understood. Every gesture, every glance, every shared smile carried meaning beyond speech. It was enough. It was perfect. Around them, the land thrummed with life. Birds took flight from the sagebrush, their wings catching the sunlight. Streams glittered like liquid crystal, reflecting the energy of the gathering. Even the wind seemed to pause for a heartbeat, carrying with it a sense of peace, of completion, of something larger than any individual. It was as if the plains themselves were celebrating the union of hearts, the intertwining of lives, the quiet triumph of generosity and trust. The rancher walked among the tribe, observing the small acts that made life here human and whole. Women taught children how to tend the fields, passing down knowledge earned through years of careful labor. Men shared stories of survival and strength, weaving lessons into the cadence of work. The children's laughter echoed through the hills, a melody of hope and possibility. And all the while, the rancher felt the pulse of connection, the realization that he was part of something far greater than any one life, any one deed. By late afternoon, the camp had settled into a rhythm that mirrored the land itself. Steady, flowing, enduring. The rancher found a quiet corner and sat on a fallen log, watching as the family he had befriended guided their kin through the rhythms of daily life. The mother's hands moved gracefully as she tended herbs. The father's eyes scanned the horizon with vigilant care, and the children explored with the curiosity and wonder that made the plains seem boundless. In that moment, he understood the true depth of his gift. It was not merely land he had offered, but dignity, community, and the chance for life to bloom in harmony with the earth. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the plains, the rancher felt a quiet tremor of awe. He had witnessed the full measure of generosity, seen its effects ripple outward, felt its warmth infuse every corner of the land. And in that awe, he found a sense of peace deeper than any he had known, a satisfaction born not of possession or pride, but of witnessing life flourish under the gentle touch of care and trust. The tribe gathered once more near the old oak, this time to share a meal. The rancher sat among them, a quiet participant in the unfolding story. Bread was broken, food was shared, and laughter rose like smoke into the fading light. He noticed small gestures, a child offering a flower, a man adjusting a bundle for another, the subtle exchange of smiles that spoke of understanding without words. Every act was a testament to the quiet beauty of human connection, to the power of trust extended and honored. As dusk settled over the plains, painting the sky in streaks of violet and amber, the rancher stood at the edge of the encampment. He looked out over the land, now alive with movement and life, and felt the weight of history and hope intertwining. The plains had witnessed countless stories, countless acts of love and loss, yet this one felt particularly sacred, a narrative carved not in stone but in hearts and hands. And in that sacred stillness, he understood something profound. The act of giving, of trusting, of opening one's life and land to others, ripples far beyond the moment. It creates bonds that endure, shapes futures unseen, and leaves echoes that may be heard long after the giver and the receiver have passed from sight. He had offered a gift without expectation, and in return, he had received the immeasurable treasure of connection, of witnessing life in its full, unfolding beauty. The sun had settled low in the sky, brushing the plains with molten gold and stretching shadows across the land like the fingers of memory. The rancher stood atop a gentle rise, watching the Apache tribe move across the land he had once called solely his own. Yet it no longer belonged to him in any way that mattered. It was alive with laughter, labor, and the quiet music of life shared. The horses grazed, the children ran with unrestrained joy, and the adults moved in rhythm with the earth itself, tending, teaching, and nurturing with hands that knew respect and care. From the town, some curious eyes had begun to wander toward the rancher's land. Skeptics and critics alike paused at the edge of the horizon, murmuring doubts or admiration, unsure of what to make of the generosity they had witnessed. Yet here, in the warm glow of evening, the land spoke for itself. The crops were steady, the streams clear, and the laughter of children mingled with the whispering wind in a harmony no argument could silence. The rancher felt the presence of the town's watchers, but paid them no mind. His attention rested entirely on the family and their kin, the tribe that had arrived at dawn to transform not only his land, but his understanding of life's quiet truths. He walked slowly among them, greeting each face with a nod, a touch, or a soft word, absorbing the small miracles of trust and connection that unfolded at every step. The father of the family caught his gaze and offered a subtle bow, a gesture of mutual respect and gratitude, and the rancher felt a warmth that penetrated deeper than any sun could reach. The evening air carried the scent of herbs, of cooking fires, of earth freshly turned, mingling with the faint perfume of wildflowers that had persisted despite the passage of seasons. Women moved gracefully, tending meals and children with equal care, while men repaired fences and checked horses with a diligence that spoke of generations of understanding the land's language. The children's laughter rose and fell like wind through chimes, a melody that seemed to echo across hills and valleys, carrying with it a promise of continuity, of life flourishing. The rancher paused beneath the old oak, the tree that had witnessed countless sunrises and storms, and watched as the tribe gathered near its roots. They exchanged small gifts, woven cloth, carved figures, bread and herbs, as tokens of gratitude and respect. Each gesture was quiet, deliberate, and filled with meaning. The rancher realized then that he had given far more than land. He had offered trust, and in return, he had received the richness of human connection, the joy of watching life take root in a place he had nurtured so long and so faithfully. A soft wind carried the distant hum of the tribe's voices, a quiet chorus of shared work and laughter. Children approached him, bringing small bundles of flowers, stones smoothed by time, and bits of clay molded into curious shapes. The rancher accepted them with gentle hands, understanding that these were not merely tokens, but symbols of belonging, of a life now intertwined with his own. In their eyes, he saw gratitude, wonder, and a sense of security he had not believed possible for anyone in these harsh lands. The sun dipped further, brushing the clouds with streaks of violet and crimson. Shadows stretched long across the plains, softening the edges of fences, trees, and cabins. The rancher climbed to the top of a small hill, looking down on the scene below. It was a living painting, the tribe moving in quiet rhythm, children chasing the wind, horses grazing peacefully, the old oak standing sentinel over it all. And in the midst of this beauty, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a peace that had been absent for decades. From the edge of the town, a small group of townsfolk had gathered. They had come, hesitant and curious, to witness the outcome of an act that had stirred whispers of doubt and admiration in equal measure. Some carried skepticism, others carried hope, but all were silent, watching as the rancher and the tribe shared meals, laughter, and work. Even those who had doubted the wisdom of his generosity could not deny the beauty and balance of what unfolded before them. The rancher descended the hill slowly, boots pressing into the warm earth, and walked toward the gathering. The father of the family stepped forward, offering a nod of acknowledgement, and the rancher returned it with a quiet smile. Around them, life flowed as it always had, steady, enduring, and full of subtle miracles. He had given the land, yes, but what he had truly given and received in turn was the gift of connection, of trust honored, of hearts opened and lives forever intertwined. Night began to fall, soft and enveloping. The campfires glimmered like stars descended to the earth, casting gentle light on faces filled with contentment. The children lay against the grass, eyes wide and sparkling, listening to stories whispered by parents and elders, tales of ancestors and journeys, of survival and hope. The rancher joined them near the fire, feeling the warmth seep into his bones, and listened. He had spent years in solitude, but here, in this moment, he felt part of something eternal. A hush settled over the plains as the stars emerged, scattered like seeds across a velvet sky. The rancher tilted his head back, letting the quiet wonder of the universe wash over him. Somewhere deep in the vastness, he understood that generosity, trust, and kindness create ripples far beyond what the eye can see. He had offered his land freely, and in return, he had received a gift no measure of gold or cattle could ever match: the knowledge that life, when nurtured with care, blossoms in ways both visible and invisible. He rose and walked to the edge of the camp, addressing both the family and the small group of townsfolk who had lingered. His voice was soft, carrying across the plains like a breeze, gentle but unwavering. He spoke not of himself, nor of what he had done, but of the simple truth he had learned, that life is richest when we extend trust without expectation, when we honor others with our care, and when we allow hearts to connect across boundaries, both visible and unseen. The tribe responded with quiet nods and murmurs, a chorus of affirmation that filled the air with warmth. The townsfolk, too, softened, realizing that this was not a tale of charity or grand gestures, but of human understanding and respect. They watched, silent and reflective, as the rancher and the family shared a moment of pure connection, a stillness in which all judgment and doubt fell away, leaving only recognition of life, lived fully and generously. As the final light of day faded, the rancher stood beneath the old oak once more, feeling its rough bark beneath his palm. He could feel the pulse of the land, steady and enduring, and the quiet strength of the people who now called it home. A gentle smile spread across his face, a recognition of the profound truth he had witnessed. That generosity, given freely, transforms not only the recipient but the giver, creating a legacy that endures far beyond any single lifetime. He looked toward the horizon, where the sky met the land in a seamless embrace, and whispered a promise to himself to continue tending this place, not as an owner, but as a guardian of trust and care. The land would thrive under the hands of those who understood it, and the bonds forged this day would ripple outward, carried in stories, in memories, in the quiet actions of those who knew the value of kindness. The family gathered around him one last time before night fully claimed the plains. The father extended a hand once more, the mother placed her hand lightly on his arm, and the children pressed close. In that touch, in that silent communion, the rancher understood that the story was complete not because it had ended, but because it had reached its fullest expression of hope, trust, and shared humanity. And so the plains rested under the soft light of stars, the campfires flickering like gentle hearts beating in the vastness. Life moved quietly, steadily, beautifully. The rancher had given a gift, the tribe had received it, and the world had shifted imperceptibly, a little softer, a little fuller because of it. Before leaving the campfire that night, the rancher turned to the audience, those who might one day hear or read his story, and spoke directly, as though whispering across time and space. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the weight of eternity. To give without expectation is to understand the truest measure of life. Let your hearts be open, your hands generous, and your trust steady. And tell me, from where are you watching this story? What acts of kindness can you offer to the world that will ripple farther than you imagine? And with that, he settled beneath the oak, the stars reflecting in his eyes, the warmth of human connection in his chest, knowing that the story would live on, not in words alone, but in the hearts of all who carried its message forward. The land was no longer a solitary expanse. It had become a sanctuary of trust, hope, and enduring love. And in the quiet that followed, the plains breathed, alive with the whispers of gratitude, the laughter of children, and the promise that generosity, once sown, blossoms forever.